Hi, welcome to day 16 of our Reset Diary. We're almost at the end of these 17 days. We've gone a little more than 2 weeks now. As you can see, I'm in my backyard and recording this from my backyard on an incredibly gorgeous day. It's 21 degrees outside with a light breeze. It's sunny. I'm in my backyard. It's just a perfect feeling day. So I wanted to just show you that I do have other places I could stay instead of the place I've always come from when I deliver these. We're going to look at today at Psalm 88. And I want you to be ready for Psalm 88. I say for today, that'll be for Friday. Psalm 88 is a difficult psalm. It's a very authentic psalm, because it's someone who's dealing with very difficult circumstances, not unlike circumstances that we're encountering here around the world, U.S., and other places around the world. I just received an email from a friend of mine, Dave West in Zimbabwe, and he was describing for me how things in Zimbabwe are. It's difficult to even to get out and get some of the most basic things, and there's almost like a setting of martial law, people guarding the roads and so forth. It's a very threatening time in many ways for people. It's also here in the U.S. A few of us were talking this morning, how in the U.S. now discussions are going on about starting up our economy. And the statement that's been made by our president and by a number of other people is, which is more risky for us, dead people or a dead economy? And part of that thinking is that we can sacrifice lives and accomplish the greater good by resurrecting our global economy. Now, I don't know about you, but those kinds of thoughts are dark. We've seen them in many times over history, and even in our recent history in different parts of the world that some of us are familiar with. And it means that we're in a time where people are making decisions for other people that have very dire consequences connected to them. And so it is a difficult time. And so this psalm, as it comes at the end of this period, is what's called the third book of the Psalms, a book that's designed to help us shift from relying on the world system to relying on God and living with God in His covenant. But I want you to see here, what we've seen so far is that living under the world system is never going to work for us. It's never going to work for us, because that system only steals, kills, and destroys. And Jesus Himself said, and God said to the Apostle John, that he who loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. And so the real choice we have isn't, are our circumstances bad now and going to be better later? Are we going to live in His love, or are we not? But even then, once we've decided that the world system isn't for us, offers nothing to us, and can give us no real promise or hope, even then, when we make that turn and we turn to the Lord, it still is not a guarantee that what we want to see take place is going to happen on demand. See, God has He's doing things now that we don't understand. And so for us to try to figure them out is going to be frustrating, and it's going to, I think, in the end, discourage us. Not that we shouldn't try to figure it out. I think about these things, I watch things, I read things, I hear things all the time. And I want to be alert to what's taking place. Yet at the same time, to try to figure out exactly what God's going to do, step 1, 2, 3, so that I can only step into things that I like versus step into things that I don't like. It just doesn't work that way. And we're going to have to recognize that in the days ahead if we haven't recognized it already. Some things aren't going to go the way that we think they should or that we hoped God would make them go. And so it's going to require a different perspective on our part. We're going to have to see it and move in it simply because the Lord our God is saying it to us. And He's moving with us. So as you look through the psalm, you're going to see again this person struggling with what's going on around them. Yet at the same time, that all of these questions are forming in him about himself and about God and how God's going to deal with him. The questions are never answered. That's disconcerting at times, maybe most of the time. But here's the reality of our covenant with God. The reality of our covenant with God is not that our questions are answered, that we have some grand explanation of a divine scheme that all works out in the end. That's really more closely related to a fairy tale than it is to reality. But what we have is our God. And if we don't have our God, and if our God isn't who He says He is, then we really don't, there isn't anything that we can have that will be of value or of substance. This is something that at this hour the Lord really wants us to see, to face up to. Because we go through much of our life trying to insulate ourselves through a variety of good things and a variety of things that people just normally do to make our lives comfortable, to make our lives meaningful, to do things that bring value to our own lives or the lives of other people. And none of these things are bad, none of them are wrong. But in the end, there comes a point, not in the end of life, but at the end of all of that, there comes a point in which it's not going to be useful. Those things aren't going to be useful unless we've come to that point where we realize if the Lord doesn't show up, there is no one to show up. If the Lord's not enough, then there isn't anyone or anything who is enough. I've been at that place before. I've been at that place several times. And I can remember saying to the Lord, Lord, if you're not enough for me, there isn't anything else. And I can remember having very little hope of what might come about because things seem so narrow at that point. This is a narrow psalm. And if you're in a narrow place, then and you're crying out to the Lord, your questions, I want to just say to you this. One, your questions are real. Your questions aren't wrong. But they aren't necessarily going to be the kinds of answers that we think would satisfy us. I'm not talking about just spiritual inner things. I'm talking about our life. That sense that our life is whole, that it's complete, that it's no longer fragmented. Part of what our God is doing, He takes us through times where we're faced with that. Jesus was faced with that. He even cried, my God, why have you forsaken me? But here's the reality. We are in covenant with our God. And even at this moment, when things might seem like there's more questions than there are answers, here's the thing. The Lord our God is either God or He isn't. And we either find out now or there's, why wait? I'm here to submit to you that our God it was very much His intention to allow this psalm into the Psalms, especially into this group of Psalms. Because moving with God in His covenant isn't always the kind of choice that produces results that we look at and say, that's what I want. Moving with God means we move with Him. It means we know Him. We look to Him. We wait for Him. It means we stake everything on Him. Because if our God doesn't come through, who will come through? The world system, we've already seen it can't. God has already demonstrated over time, and He already demonstrated it by raising Jesus from the dead. Our God comes through. And that is enough. If it's not enough, it's time to decide it. It's time to decide it. Either God is enough for me or there isn't enough. Not God on demand, not God my way, not God doing what I tell Him to do. But my God Himself is enough for me. I want to invite you during these days where it seems like you're surrounded by a flood of things that are threatening to overcome you. Or whether that happens today or next week or next year, doesn't really matter. But I invite you to look at this thing. Look at what's happening and what isn't happening. And ask yourself the question, is my God enough for me?